The chocolate birthday cake sat half-eaten on paper plates as 30 family members gathered in Mom's living room for what had become an annual tradition of celebrating her 62nd birthday. The house buzzed with the familiar sounds of family conversation, cousins catching up, aunts sharing gossip, uncles debating sports scores over beer. I sat in my usual spot on the old recliner in the corner, methodically eating my slice of cake while listening to the soundtrack of my family's success stories. My brother Kevin held court near the fireplace, describing his latest promotion to regional sales manager. My sister Michelle commanded attention by the kitchen island, showing off photos from her family's recent vacation to Europe. "And what about you, Rachel?" Aunt Linda asked, turning her attention to me with the kind of polite interest reserved for family obligations. "Still working at that little computer place?" The conversation quieted slightly. My work had become something of a family mystery over the years. Everyone knew I did something with computers, but the specifics seemed to elude them. "Still working in software development," I replied, taking another bite of cake. "Software development," Uncle Tom repeated with the tone of someone trying to sound impressed by something he didn't understand. "That's like making apps, right? Among other things. Are any of your apps famous?" my teenage cousin Ashley asked. "Like, would I have them on my phone?" "Probably not the kind of apps you'd use." "Oh," Ashley's interest visibly deflated. "So they're like business apps? Boring stuff." More knowing looks exchanged around the room. The family had clearly classified my work as technical but unimportant, the kind of behind-the-scenes computer work that kept the world running but didn't generate headlines or impressive dinner party stories. "Rachel's always been our little computer nerd," Mom said with the fond condescension reserved for explaining a child's harmless quirks to adults. "Ever since high school, always typing away on her keyboard, building websites for her friends." What they didn't know was that my little computer place was actually Quantum Solutions, a cybersecurity and data analytics company that I'd built into a $340 million enterprise over the past 8 years. We protected the digital infrastructure of major hospitals, financial institutions, and government agencies. Our client list included the Department of Defense, 3 major banks, and 12 international corporations. But to my family, I was Rachel who worked with computers and lived modestly, therefore I must be struggling professionally while pursuing technical work that nobody really understood. "The important thing," Dad said diplomatically, "is that Rachel enjoys her work and is financially stable." "Are you financially stable?" Kevin asked with genuine curiosity. "Because you still live in that tiny apartment and drive the same car you've had since college." "I'm doing fine financially." "Fine isn't the same as successful," Michelle interjected. "Kevin just bought a house with a 3-car garage. I'm planning to renovate our kitchen with granite countertops. Those are signs of real financial success." "Different people have different definitions of success," I said quietly. "True," Mom agreed, "but some definitions are more realistic than others." The conversation moved on to Kevin's house plans and Michelle's kitchen renovation, leaving me to finish my cake in the comfortable anonymity that I'd cultivated over the years. It was easier to let them assume I was modestly successful than to explain the reality of my situation. What made their assumptions particularly ironic was that I'd been quietly supporting several family members for years without their knowledge. Kevin's successful sales career had been supplemented by consulting contracts that I'd routed through shell companies to his employer. Michelle's husband's construction business stayed afloat because I'd been hiring them for various projects through my network of subsidiary companies. "Rachel," Mom's voice pulled me back to the present conversation. "Could you help clear these plates? The birthday girl shouldn't have to clean up after her own party." I stood up and began collecting paper plates and plastic forks, grateful for a task that would keep me busy while the family continued their discussions of career achievements and financial milestones. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" Mom announced to the room as I loaded dishes into the dishwasher. "How different my children turned out, despite being raised in the same house with the same values." This was dangerous territory. Mom's birthday parties had a tendency to devolve into impromptu family therapy sessions, especially after she'd had a few glasses of wine. "Kevin has always been ambitious," she continued, warming to her theme. "Even as a child, he knew he wanted to be successful in business. He set goals and worked toward them systematically." Murmurs of agreement from various relatives. Kevin beamed with parental approval. Michelle has always been practical and family-oriented. She married a good man, bought a nice house, and is raising her children with strong values. More appreciative sounds from the audience. Michelle waved graciously from her position of maternal success. But Rachel. Mom's voice took on a different tone. Rachel has always been different. I continued loading the dishwasher, hoping this conversation would move in a different direction. Different how? Aunt Linda asked, though her tone suggested she suspected where this was headed. Well, Mom said, clearly having thought about this extensively, Rachel has never seemed to care about the things that normal people care about. What things? Uncle Tom asked. Success. Recognition. Building something impressive with her life. The room fell quiet. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes watching me as I methodically arranged dirty dishes. Rachel's successful in her own way, Dad said diplomatically. Is she, though? Mom's voice carried the edge of someone who'd been holding back opinions for too long. Success means achieving something meaningful. It means building wealth, establishing a reputation, contributing something valuable to the world. Mom, Kevin tried to intervene, Rachel works hard. Working hard isn't the same as achieving results, Mom replied. Rachel has been working hard at computer jobs for 8 years, and what does she have to show for it? I turned around to face the room, curious about where this conversation was headed. What should I have to show for it? I asked. A house. A nice car. A substantial bank account. A title that means something. Recognition in your field. The kinds of things that indicate someone has built a real career instead of just having a job. Maybe I have those things and just don't talk about them. Rachel, honey, Mom's voice carried the patient tone reserved for correcting children who were telling obvious lies. If you had those things, we'd know about them. Would you? Of course we would. Successful people don't hide their success. They buy houses, they drive nice cars, they talk about their achievements. They don't live in studio apartments and drive 15-year-old Hondas and act like their work is some kind of state secret. The logic was flawless from her perspective. If I were truly successful, I would display that success in ways that she could recognize and understand. Maybe I prefer privacy to display, I suggested. Privacy is one thing. But what you have isn't privacy, it's embarrassment. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Embarrassment about what? I asked quietly. About the fact that you haven't achieved anything worth displaying. About the fact that at 33 years old, you're still working at the same level you were working at when you graduated college. You don't know what level I was working at when I graduated college. I know that 8 years later your lifestyle hasn't improved noticeably. That tells me everything I need to know about your career trajectory. Uncle Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Aunt Linda stared at her wine glass. The family was witnessing something more intense than the usual birthday party conversation. Mom, Michelle said gently, maybe we should talk about something else. No, Mom's voice gained strength, fueled by years of accumulated frustration and wine-loosened inhibitions. I've been tiptoeing around this topic for years, making excuses for Rachel, pretending that her lack of ambition is just a different approach to life. By lack of ambition? Yes, Rachel. Your lack of ambition. Your contentment with mediocrity. Your acceptance of a life that has no impact, no significance, no meaning beyond paying your bills and existing quietly in the background. The room was completely silent now except for the sound of the dishwasher running in the kitchen. You're an embarrassment to this family, declared, her voice carrying clearly across the living room. My siblings laughed and agreed as if Mom had finally said what everyone had been thinking for years. Finally, Kevin said with obvious relief. Someone said it. I mean, we all love Rachel, Michelle added, but let's be honest, she's not exactly living up to the family's standards of achievement. It's like she's deliberately chosen to be ordinary, Aunt Linda observed. Worse than ordinary, Uncle Tom added. At least ordinary people try to improve their circumstances. Rachel seems content to stay exactly where she is. I quietly continued eating my cake, letting their words wash over me while I processed this public character assassination. The thing that bothers me most, Mom continued, is that Rachel acts like her work is important when it's clearly just a basic technical job that anyone with a computer science degree could do. She probably fixes people's email problems, Kevin said, earning chuckles from several relatives. Or build simple websites for small businesses, Michelle added. Nothing wrong with that kind of work, Dad said diplomatically, but it's not the kind of work that changes the world. Exactly, Mom said triumphantly. Rachel acts like she's some kind of important consultant when she's probably just an employee at some tiny tech company that nobody's ever heard of. What's the name of your company again? Linda asked. Quantum Solutions. See? Never heard of it, Uncle Tom said with satisfaction. If it were important, we'd recognize the name. Like Microsoft or Apple, Ashley added helpfully. Right. Real tech companies are household names. Rachel's company is probably 3 people working out of a strip mall office. The assessment was delivered with the confidence of people who had solved a long-standing family mystery through logical deduction. Suddenly, the TV news interrupted with breaking news. The large-screen TV in Mom's living room, which had been playing quietly in the background, suddenly flashed with the bold red graphics that indicated breaking news. We interrupt your regular programming for this breaking news announcement, the anchor said, her voice carrying the urgency reserved for significant developments. The room fell silent as 30 people automatically turned their attention to the television. Local entrepreneur donates $50 million to Children's Hospital. The words appeared in large text across the bottom of the screen as the anchor continued reading. In an unprecedented act of philanthropy, Quantum Solutions CEO Rachel Morrison has announced a $50 million donation to Children's Medical Center for the construction of a new pediatric cancer research facility. Mom's fork dropped when she saw my face on screen. The news broadcast cut to footage of me standing at a podium in what was clearly a hospital conference room, speaking to an audience of medical professionals and journalists. This research facility will house state-of-the-art equipment for childhood cancer research and provide hope for families facing every parent's worst nightmare, my televised image was saying. Quantum Solutions is proud to support the medical community's efforts to save children's lives. The room was absolutely silent except for the sound of the news anchor's voice continuing the story. Morrison, whose cybersecurity company Quantum Solutions has quietly become one of the region's most successful tech firms, chose to make this announcement on her company's 8th anniversary. The broadcast showed additional footage of the hospital groundbreaking ceremony, with shots of me wearing a hard hat and speaking with doctors and hospital administrators. Quantum Solutions, founded 8 years ago by Morrison, specializes in cybersecurity and data analytics for healthcare systems, financial institutions and government agencies. The company's annual revenue exceeds $300 million, making it one of the largest privately held tech companies in the state. Kevin's mouth fell open. The Pediatric Cancer Research Facility, which will be named the Morrison Center for Childhood Cancer Research, represents the largest single donation in the hospital's history. Michelle set down her wine glass with shaking hands. Morrison, who began her career developing security protocols for military applications, has built Quantum Solutions into a major player in the cybersecurity industry while maintaining a deliberately low public profile. The news story continued with interviews from hospital administrators and footage of the proposed research facility, but I was watching my family's faces instead of the television. In related news, the anchor continued, Morrison was recently named to Forbes' list of America's most successful entrepreneurs under 40, with a personal net worth estimated at over $100 million. Uncle Tom made a small choking sound. The donation announcement comes as Quantum Solutions prepares to expand internationally, with new offices planned in London, Tokyo, and Sydney. The news story concluded with additional footage of me speaking at the hospital podium, then cut back to the anchor. We'll continue following this story as construction begins on the Morrison Center for Childhood Cancer Research. In other news, someone reached for the remote and muted the television. The silence in Mom's living room was absolute. 30 family members sat frozen, staring alternately at the now silent television and at me. Rachel, Mom's voice was barely a whisper, was that you on the news? Yes. You donated $50 million to the Children's Hospital? Yes. You have $50 million to donate? I have considerably more than $50 million. Forbes was conservative in their estimate. But you work at a little computer company. I founded and run Quantum Solutions. We're not little. The news said $300 million in annual revenue, Kevin said weakly. That's approximately correct. And you're worth over $100 million? Michelle asked. Personal net worth fluctuates depending on company valuation, but yes, that's in the right range. Rachel, Dad's voice was very careful. How long have you been successful? Define successful. How long have you been worth millions of dollars? About 6 years. The company became profitable in year 2, became valuable in year 3, and became very valuable around year 5. 6 years, Mom repeated slowly. You've been worth millions of dollars for 6 years? Yes. And you never told us? I tried to tell you. Multiple times. But every time I mentioned my work, you dismissed it as unimportant technical stuff that couldn't possibly be valuable. But you live like you don't have money, Aunt Linda protested. I live according to my values, not my bank balance. I prefer to invest in meaningful projects rather than expensive displays. Like donating $50 million to children's cancer research, Ashley said, her voice filled with awe. That's one example. What are other examples? Uncle Tom asked. The new computer lab at the community college. The scholarship program for underprivileged students studying computer science. The free cybersecurity training program for small nonprofits. You funded all of those? Michelle asked. Among other projects. Rachel, Mom said, tears forming in her eyes. Why didn't you correct us when we said you were unsuccessful? Because you preferred thinking I was unsuccessful. It made you feel better about your own achievements. The weight of that statement settled over the room. That's not true, Kevin protested weakly. Kevin, last Christmas you gave me advice about setting realistic career goals and accepting that not everyone can be highly successful. You needed me to be less successful than you so you could feel good about your own accomplishments. Kevin flinched visibly. Michelle, you've spent years making comments about how some people prioritize money while others prioritize meaningful work, implying that my work wasn't meaningful because it didn't generate visible wealth. Michelle looked like she might cry. Mom, you just told 30 people that I was an embarrassment to the family because I hadn't achieved anything worth displaying. You needed me to be a failure so you could feel like a successful parent to your other children. Rachel, Mom whispered, we had no idea. You had no idea because you never asked. You assumed I was unsuccessful and then interpreted everything I did through that assumption. But if you're worth over $100 million, why do you drive an old Honda and live in a studio apartment? I don't live in a studio apartment. I live in a penthouse downtown. The studio you've seen is my satellite office where I meet with local clients. A penthouse. Dad repeated. 4,000 square feet with a view of the entire city. I also own a house in the mountains for weekends and a place in Silicon Valley for when I'm meeting with West Coast clients. Multiple houses. Ashley asked. Real estate is a good investment and I travel frequently for business. What kind of business travel? Uncle Tom asked. Consulting with government agencies, speaking at international conferences, meeting with clients in various countries. Last month I was in Geneva working with the World Health Organization on cybersecurity protocols for global health data. The World Health Organization? Mom's voice was faint. Among other clients. We also work with NATO, the Federal Reserve, and several major hospitals. Rachel, Kevin said slowly, when you offered to help me with networking opportunities last year, were you being serious? Completely serious. I know decision makers at most major corporations and government agencies. I was offering to introduce you to people who could accelerate your career significantly. And when you offered to invest in my husband's construction business? Michelle asked. I was offering to provide capital and connect him with larger projects. My real estate investments require substantial construction work. How much were you planning to invest? She asked weakly. I was thinking around $5 million initially, with more available as the business expanded. $5 million, she repeated. It seemed like a reasonable amount to help family. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Rachel, Mom finally said, I feel sick about what I said tonight. You said what you believed based on the information you had. Information I never bothered to verify. Information you preferred to my actual explanations of my work. Why did we prefer it? Dad asked. Because having a highly successful daughter would have been threatening to your self-image as parents. It was easier to see me as someone who needed guidance than as someone who had already achieved more than you expected. And we missed 8 years of being proud of you, Mom said, tears flowing freely now. You weren't missing opportunities to be proud of me. You were actively choosing not to see accomplishments that would have made you proud. Because we were afraid, Kevin said quietly. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you were more successful than us, it would make our own achievements seem smaller. Success isn't a competition within families. But it felt like one, Michelle added. And we needed to win. So you made me lose even when I was actually winning. The television, still muted, continued showing evening news stories, but nobody was paying attention to anything except the conversation happening in Mom's living room. Rachel, Mom said, what happens now? What do you mean? I mean, how do we move forward from this? How do we be a family when we've been so wrong about who you are? We start by getting to know who I actually am instead of who you thought I was. Will you teach us? I'll give you the opportunity to learn. What does that look like? It looks like asking about my work instead of assuming you understand it. It looks like respecting my choices even when they're different from traditional displays of success. It looks like treating me like an accomplished adult instead of like a disappointing child. We can do that, Dad said quickly. Can you? Because it's harder than it sounds. It means questioning assumptions you've made about success, about achievement, about what matters in life. We want to try, Michelle said. Then let's start tomorrow. Come to my office, my real office, and I'll show you what Quantum Solutions actually does. Your real office? Ashley asked. The 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower downtown. We occupy the entire floor. The Meridian Tower? Uncle Tom's voice cracked. That's the most expensive office space in the city. Prime location is important for client meetings. We host representatives from major corporations and government agencies regularly. Rachel, Mom said, could you tell us about the Children's Hospital donation? Why that cause? Because childhood cancer research saves lives in ways that can be measured directly. Every breakthrough in treatment means specific children get to grow up instead of dying. And you can afford to donate $50 million? I can afford to donate $50 million annually if I choose to. The hospital donation is part of a larger philanthropic plan. How much larger? Kevin asked. I've committed to donating at least $200 million over the next 5 years to various causes: medical research, education, environmental protection, and poverty reduction. $200 million? Michelle whispered. Money is only valuable if it's used for something meaningful. I've kept enough for personal security and business investment, but the rest should go toward making the world better. Mom stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. Rachel, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. For what specifically? For calling you an embarrassment when you're actually the most accomplished person in this room. For treating you like a failure when you're actually changing the world. For being so blind to your achievements that I made you hide your success to preserve my feelings. Thank you for saying that. Can you forgive me? Mom, I forgave you before you apologized. My success doesn't change how much I love this family. Even after we treated you so badly? You treated me the way you thought was appropriate based on what you believed about my life. Now you know better, so you can do better. How do we do better? Dad asked. By being proud of each other's achievements instead of threatened by them. By asking questions instead of making assumptions. By supporting each other's choices even when they're different from what we'd choose ourselves. Ashley raised her hand tentatively. Rachel, could I maybe visit your office sometime? And learn about cybersecurity? I'd love to show you around. Cybersecurity is a great field for people who like solving puzzles and protecting others. And Rachel, Kevin said, about those networking opportunities you mentioned. Still available. I'll introduce you to people who can help advance your career significantly. Why would you help me after how I treated you tonight? Because you're my brother and your success doesn't diminish mine. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the newly opened Morrison Center for Childhood Cancer Research, addressing an audience of medical professionals, family members, and local dignitaries. The research facility was already making breakthroughs in treatment protocols that would save children's lives around the world. In the front row sat my family, Mom, Dad, Kevin, Michelle, and various relatives who had learned to see me clearly instead of through their assumptions. They asked thoughtful questions about my work now, supported my philanthropic initiatives, and celebrated my achievements instead of feeling threatened by them. This research center represents more than a financial donation, I said to the audience. It represents the belief that when we work together toward meaningful goals, we can accomplish things that seemed impossible. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and toured the facility, Mom approached me. Rachel, I've been thinking about your birthday party 6 months ago. What about it? I keep wondering how you stayed so calm when I called you an embarrassment in front of 30 people. Because I knew you were wrong, and I knew that eventually you'd realize you were wrong. Weren't you hurt? I was disappointed that my family preferred assumptions to curiosity, but I wasn't hurt by the specific content of those assumptions. How did you know we'd eventually see the truth? Because truth has a way of revealing itself, and because I love you enough to be patient while you learn to see clearly. You've been teaching us all along, haven't you? I've been living my life according to my values and waiting for you to become curious about what those values actually were. And now we are curious. Now you are. And that's made all the difference. The greatest victory hadn't been proving my family wrong about my lack of success. It had been teaching them that success comes in many forms, that assumptions are dangerous substitutes for genuine curiosity, and that sometimes the people who look the least impressive are actually having the greatest impact. But more than that, we'd learned that family love works better when it's based on understanding rather than projection, when it celebrates achievement rather than feeling threatened by it, and when it asks questions instead of making comfortable assumptions about each other's lives. Sometimes the best revenge isn't showing people how wrong they were about your failures. Sometimes it's showing them how much good can happen when they learn to see clearly instead of seeing through fear, and when they choose curiosity over assumption about the people they love.